My name is Rachel, and my co-host Lindsay and I are two Psych NPs in a pod. Whether you're a current or a future psychiatric nurse practitioner, we are providing you a dose of support with practical tips, guest experts, and clinical gems from our combined 18 years of psych experience. We're here not only to share what we've learned over the years, but to connect with our peers who have a lot to teach us. Think of this as a conversation between two good friends who just happen to be Psych NPs and who want you to thrive. Get ready to feel encouraged and to remember why you started. See you in the pod. Hi, Lindsay. Welcome to the first episode. How are you today?
Rachel. I'm great. I'm so excited about our first episode.
Do you remember what our first segment is called?
Of course. It's What Are We Reading?
Yes. This is where we share what we're currently reading or a resource we've been using recently, how we feel about it, and if we would recommend it to our listeners. Do you want to go first?
Sure. So I've been on a kick of scouring all the Psych NP resources to check them all out. And Kafer's,
How do you spell Kafer's?
Cafer. And it's a great book that has all these cute medication mascots. For instance, like Lamb Ictal. So I think if I had had it earlier in my career, it could have been very useful. Now that I've committed a lot of this to memory as a more experienced Psych NP, I don't know. We'll see. It also has visuals for other concepts. So yeah, I'm excited to kind of delve into it more. So,
and you could use that with your mentees probably who are really getting more familiar with the meds, right?
Exactly. Because I had such a hard time remembering these types of things. And so I think it'd be a great book for students, new grads. Like he uses other visuals to explain concepts like pharmacodynamic interactions. He uses dinos, get it? Dynamic, pharmacodynamic, dinos. So
it's like, it's a tool to memorize things using like imagery and mascots to represent.
Yes, though, it's really cool, the visuals that he's come up with to help you kind of understand certain concepts that are a little trickier.
I actually love that, especially because I often use the animal technique to remember people's names. Like I'll associate their name with the animal they remind me of.
What am I
do that
for you?
Yes. You're a collie. Oh. Like Lassie.
Okay, cool.
Lassie, Lindsay. Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense.
I'm currently listening to an audiobook called The Art of Gathering: How We Meet and Why It Matters. This book was recommended to me by my hero, Catherine Esker, who is the founder of the Therapist Network. When we told her that we wanted to create something similar for Psych NPs, she recommended it. So I immediately bought it, and it's been really interesting. I feel like there's a lot of concepts in it that I can even apply to the DBT group that I co-lead, because it really focuses on how to make meaningful experiences in groups. So
I love that.
Love it. Yeah, I wish I had known about it sooner, because I think a lot of the concepts can apply to a psychiatric nursing like milieu, like how to manage a milieu in an inpatient hospital. So lots of cool things. Highly recommend it for anyone interested in that kind of thing. Group dynamics.
Are you doing an audio? Are you an audiobook person, or are you a physical book person?
I am definitely an audiobook person. Ever since audiobooks have come out, that's all I do. Let's include these books in the show notes so that our listeners can see them, because they are, long titles. So
yeah, absolutely.
We'll include these in the show notes.
The only other person who orders as many resources and invests in as much professional development as I do.
Yeah, we sort of have a problem. Like we sort of compulsively, we love to learn. The other book that I'm reading, I actually heard about on the Psychiatry and Psychotherapy podcast, which is one of my favorite psychiatry podcasts with Dr. David Puter. It's called Better Results: Using Deliberate Practice to Improve Therapeutic Effectiveness. Long title, but it's really interesting. I know. It's really hard to remember it. But doing it with my little book club that I started, and it's been really interesting. So anyone who's interested in actively learning how to actively improve your therapeutic skill, I recommend. We purchase a lot of resource books, but I think it lends itself really well to what we love to do, which is mentor new Psych NPs and learn new things. And also, I think I love reading because it really opens my eyes to what's possible. And so reading about people who inspire me is just one of my favorite pastimes. And that is why I named our second segment of the show the Psych NP Expander segment. This is the segment where we will be interviewing psychiatric nurse practitioners who inspire us.
And there are so many Psych NPs out there who are doing really innovative and creative things. And so we are going to feature somebody every episode, and hopefully they'll inspire you as much as they inspire us.
So for this episode, our very first episode, we are actually going to be asking each other the questions that we will be asking our future guests, so you guys can get to know your host. But first, Lindsay, I have to ask you, did you take the Taylor Swift album quiz that I sent you? The BuzzFeed quiz.
You are obsessed with personality tests. Since I've met you, I've taken like 10. But yes, I did.
I, you know, as an ENFP, Enneagram 9 Wing 8 Hufflepuff, I do love a good personality test. I love personality tests. I have a problem. Yeah. And also, if anyone's wondering, I am a Leo, Libra rising, and Sagittarius moon. So big fan of personality tests. I think they're so fun. And even when they're just silly, I think it's just a fun way to get to know people and get to know their vibe and just to strike up conversation. So I honestly, for every episode, I do want to make our guests take a random personality test.
I love it.
Every time.
I think it's great.
And so for this one, I picked a special one that I felt like was really fitting for us because one, it's a BuzzFeed quiz. We're very millennial, you know, both of us are millennials. It's also a quiz about Taylor Swift, who, you know, we're basically the same age. Like we would have gone to school with her, probably. Yeah. And I just think it's appropriate. So I think, oh my gosh, you were born in 89? Oh my gosh. So you should have gotten 1989 as your album. Did you not?
No, I didn't. I got Speak Now. Are you familiar with such era?
Oh, yeah. I am not the kind of girl that should be rudely barging in on a white veil occasion.
Wow. I'm impressed.
You know that?
Your Taylor Swift songs, don't you?
Oh, I assumed that you would be a Swiftie, but I was wrong. It's me. I'm the Swiftie.
Yeah. I mean, I've always kind of been like, I don't know, late to the party on that stuff, like kind of resistant. But I do like her. I like her character, and she seems like a good person, and she writes great music. So, but no, I don't know all the songs. What about you? What did you get for your little T Swiftie BuzzFeed quiz?
The era that I got was Folklore, but that is one of my favorite albums of hers. So I think it's fitting because I am in a relationship with a folk musician, and my Taylor Swift era is Folklore. So,
oh, that's fitting. All right. That's absolutely fitting.
Now that is settled, Lindsay, take it away.
Rachel and I agree that starting with some identifying factors, some psychosocial things, helps put the person at ease who's sitting in front of you for an intake and kind of shows them that you care about them as a person before you get really into the nitty-gritty stuff.
Yeah, I love to see a person in the context of their lives before we dive into things. So we're going to do the same thing with our guests and with each other. And for any students, this can actually be a little bit of an example for you of how you might approach meeting a new patient for the first time and how you might ask some of these questions. Also, side note, I currently work with kids and teens, and I'm just saying that if you want to build rapport with a stony little teenager who does not want to talk to you, BuzzFeed quizzes are an option because it surprises them. It makes them laugh. Oh, yeah, I've done it. BuzzFeed quizzes, YouTube videos. Yeah, you got to be creative. If you make them laugh, it usually cracks the code. So
I never really thought about it like that. That's cool. So Rachel, first question, tell me a little bit about where you're living, who you live with.
Yeah, so I live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I live in a house that I actually just bought over the summer. And I live here with the love of my life, who is an 8-year-old Dachshund Beagle mix with a crooked front paw. Her name is Nessie. And the other love of my life, Dan, who is a very talented musician. So yeah, we're a happy little family.
I love
What
that.
about you?
I'm in Phoenix, Arizona, and I live with my husband and 3 bonus sons and a toddler and a golden doodle. So we stay pretty busy with sports and just the chaos of family life. But yeah, that's
because the bonus sons are teenagers too. That's no joke. 3 teenagers. Okay. So, Lindsay, what are you doing for work currently, and what does that look like day to day?
So most of my Psych NP career, I've really hustled. I've worked full time. After I had my son during the pandemic, I wanted to pivot a little bit. And so I ended up launching a private practice about 9 months ago. And now my days are filled with seeing some clients and doing a mix of other things like mentorship. And so I'm really passionate about that and really just practicing in a way that aligns with my values, trying to learn more psychotherapy interventions, integrated psychiatry, taking the time that I want with clients. It's been really like a year where my passion is like at its peak. So that is where I'm at.
And Lindsay, do you live in an independent practice state?
I sure do. How about you, Rachel?
No, I do not. So I forgot that Arizona, where you live, was independent practice. And you've only ever worked there. So that's all you've ever known is independent practice. So I came from North Carolina, which is restricted practice, moved to Wisconsin, which is also restricted practice. But in Wisconsin, I will say we are required to have a collaborating physician, but very different from North Carolina. In Wisconsin, the physician does not have to be a psychiatrist. Like the physician does not have to match your specialty, which I find very interesting. So technically I could have a collaborating physician who is an ophthalmologist or a surgeon.
That is very random.
Very random and interesting. But yeah, it is a restricted practice state. So
gotcha. So tell me a little bit about what you're doing these days as a Psych NP.
Yeah, so I work part-time. I'm a big proponent of working part-time and not full-time. Even if you have 2 or 3 part-time jobs instead of 1 full-time, that's my jam. So I currently work 3 days a week at an outpatient pediatric psych clinic, and I have a lot of fun there. And I use the other 2 days I've been working on launching my own private practice, and I have launched it, but I don't have any patients yet, but I know that will come.
Absolutely. That's so exciting.
Yeah, it's definitely better than the jail, working at the jail, which was my other part-time job last year. It was a really interesting experience, but it feels good to be doing something that's really in alignment with my values. And so it's been really fun.
Now tell me, how long have you been a Psych NP again?
I have been a Psych NP for 3.5 years.
Okay.
Yeah, I graduated in 2020. What about you?
I've been a Psych NP for going on 9, believe it or not. Crazy, huh?
I know.
Can you tell me a little bit more, Rachel, about your different job experiences that you've had as a Psych NP?
Yeah, I feel like even though I've only been a Psych NP for 3.5 years, I've worked at a lot of different places already. So when I graduated in 2020, I immediately started working at this amazing private practice as an independent contractor. It was a therapist-owned private practice. My boss was such a good person. Everyone that worked there was really kind, and you could bring your dog to work. But because I graduated in 2020, it was all virtual. All of a sudden. So I was just alone in my home office, and it was really hard for me. I felt really isolated, even though people were supportive and said I could reach out to them. It was hard. It's hard to reach out when you don't know people's schedules and you're just feeling like you want that, in-person connection.
So you were telehealth as a new grad?
Yeah. Because 2020, like that was not the plan, but then it was like, okay, this is happening. So
gotcha.
Yeah, that was really hard for me. So at that job, I saw I would say my patient population was more of a upper middle class kind of affluent patient population, which was really different to who I was used to working with in the hospital as a nurse. I saw kids, teens, and adults there. So it was a nice little mix, but I definitely felt like I wanted to be challenged more and that I wanted more direct mentorship and structured support. So a friend of mine told me about a fellowship program. And that's why I moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, because that's where the fellowship program was. And
awesome.
yeah, so I had never considered moving to Wisconsin until I heard about this program. And there was only 2 spots available. And so, yeah, a lot of the programs that are out there, there's not that many spots and there's not that many programs that exist, though I do think that more are popping up. So generally, fellowships are about 12 months in length. And the way mine worked was I rotated through different specialties for those 12 months, and I had my medical decision making scrutinized, which I wanted. I loved it. It was hard, but it was really nice to get that validation that, okay, I do know what I'm doing, and really just have it in that supportive setting. So it also gave me more clarity on the specialties that I really thrived in. So it was really great. My family thought I was crazy because I left my cushy private practice work from home job that was paying me $120,000 a year, and then moved to the Midwest, a random place I'd never been before, and made $60K a year. But I really just saw it as basically getting an extra year of school. Then, once I finished that, I started working at my current job part-time and worked at the jail for a little bit. Now I'm just here doing my part-time pediatric clinic and my private practice. So
awesome. Well, I feel like that's very on brand for Rachel to move to a different state for the sake of like investing in your education and mentorship and all those things that you talk about all the time that you really value. So do you feel like that was pretty foundational for you, that experience?
I often think about if I had had access to people like you or some of the other mentorship and course opportunities that have cropped up, I wonder if I even would have pursued it, because even just those, 3.5 years ago, there were so few opportunities for things like that. And now I feel like there's a lot more accessible. So it's possible that I would have signed up to, it's possible that I would have signed up with a mentor and then I wouldn't have felt the need to do a fellowship. I feel like it wasn't something that I absolutely needed to do, but I really enjoyed it. So.
Okay. Well, that's interesting because you were the first person I ever met who had done a fellowship, and I had never heard of any that were accessible for me. So I think that's really cool.
So what about you? What have your Psych NP jobs looked like over the last 9 years?
So my first job I stayed at for close to 7 years. I was working outpatient, community health. I saw a lot of co-occurring substance abuse and bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety, things like that. Higher acuity for sure than I was expecting to have as a new grad. I had very, very good support, and I had structured staffings, one-on-one, weekly. My boss and mentor, I really just lucked out getting her because she was really invested in my learning process. And I know there were times where I was popping in her office or texting her or calling her in addition to the structured time she was giving me. And she never once made me feel like a nuisance or seemed irritated. And that's pretty huge, for somebody who's actively practicing as a Psych NP, because it is a demanding job. So I was very, very grateful to have that support. And then after that, I did some different things. I tried some skilled nursing facility stuff, and I was like a 1099 for a hybrid practice that was both primarily telepsychiatry. And then I launched my private practice. Not too long ago. So that's kind of been my journey.
So you really stayed at that first community mental health job for 7 years. That's a long time. I'm curious how many patients would you have on like a typical day working in that setting?
Probably on average 12 to 15, I would say, on average. I transitioned into a leadership role there, and so I grew in that aspect as well. So I wasn't doing only patient care kind of the last couple years. that I was there. So I do feel like I grew quite a bit at that first role. But really, the mentorship, having that support, like for me, I need that support, validation, encouragement. Like I thrive off that when I feel like, okay, I am doing a good job. You know what I mean? So I was very grateful. My boss from Ohio, good Midwest vibes. So yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah, that's such a nice culture to work in, especially because you were working with high acuity patients, and that's not a small number of patients to see in a day. I've definitely heard worse from community clinics, 25 patients a day, things like that. And 12 to 15 did that feel manageable, or did you kind of wish it was different? Or
I wished it were different, like in the sense of it was so taxing, trying to learn what I was trying to learn and appear confident. And so I was just really exhausted. It really took a lot of energy. So it was tough. I'm glad though that I started out in an environment like that, because I really feel like I learned a lot of skills. And, I did. So I think it really was a foundational, to set me up for success as a Psych NP moving forward.
Yeah, I feel like that type of clinic, you see a lot of diverse, difficult to treat patients. And I think there's a huge benefit to that. So I think that was what I felt was missing in it's like my first Psych NP job was a little too cushy, right? It was a great place to work, but I was like, I feel like I need to be challenged more. So yeah.
Gotcha. I forgot one other detail of a benefit of working at that place. It was a National Health Service Corps. I think that's right. A National Health Service Corps approved site. And so I got a loan repayment through that program. And so that was definitely a huge benefit.
Yeah, amazing.
So Rachel, tell me about your Psych NP program, like maybe the top 3 things that you loved about it.
The first thing I loved about it was the fact that I had it basically almost completely paid for by my employer, because I was working as a nurse, and as long as I was working as a nurse, they would cover a certain percentage of my tuition. And my program allowed me to attend as a part-time student. So I really got a lot of my expenses covered that way. And they also allowed me to teach as a clinical instructor for their undergraduate nursing students. And that also helped pay. So I basically graduated with very, very little educational debt from my graduate program because of that. So huge thing that I loved.
Yeah.
I also loved that it was a very psychotherapy heavy program. The program director was actually a clinical nurse specialist, and her specialty was pediatric play therapy. And she had been a CNS in pediatrics for like decades, and she had her own private practice and did play therapy with kids. A lot of my teachers were clinical nurse specialists who had their own therapy practices. One specialized in DBT, one specialized in group therapy. So we really got a lot of really great therapy experiences in our program. So I loved that. I also learned that not every program sets up your clinical placements for you. So I was very grateful that my program did that. Did you like your Psych NP program?
I did. Yes, I did. My Psych NP program was hybrid. And so we had an on-campus immersion every semester. And I loved being able to connect with my peers. I still talk to a lot of the individuals I went to school with, some of them even weekly still. So I really relied on them for emotional support and, help on even just like the academic stuff, being able to shoot a text to get clarification on X, Y, or Z. Nice. I loved that. The program that I went to had a good reputation in the community with preceptors, and they put a lot of thought into clinical placements. I feel like they really made personalized recommendations based on our interests and personalities. Me being able to do that rotation, learning DBT, I think is an example of that. So I really love that as well.
I think that aspect you mentioned of having community with your classmates is a really key part that's important for me too. So
I loved it. Absolutely. The other thing I liked about my Psych NP program was some of the classes, some of the systems classes really at the time kind of seemed like, what's the point of these? And now looking back, it kind of broadened my thinking in terms of thinking about things on more of a systems level and how to impact change in bigger ways. And so I did like that as well.
Yeah, because you got your DNP, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. I got my MSN. So we had some classes like that, but definitely not as many as a DNP,
Yeah. Rachel, what jobs did you have before you became an NP?
Oh, this is a fun one. This is a fun one. Okay. So I started out in frozen yogurt. I was a frozen yogurt, TJ Maxx, movie theater, hostess at a Mexican restaurant. And I was briefly an autopsy assistant, which was very illuminating for me. I was a nursing student at the time, so learning about anatomy and then really seeing it was special. And I also just had a few different jobs, like childcare type jobs, Boys and Girls Club, like little part-time things here and there. So those were sort of my pre-nursing jobs. And then my first real job was being a nurse. So I was like 22 and I became a nurse, went straight into psychiatry, even though every nurse that I knew was like, don't do it. I did it anyway. And I have to say, my first job was a nightmare. But even that could not throw me off my course. Okay. My first job, I didn't know the questions to ask at the interview. I ended up working at a private facility that had, a 1:24 nurse to patient ratio, very high acuity, paper charts.
Wow. Oh my.
I didn't ask any of these questions because I just didn't know better. So had a really, really bad experience there. But luckily I think I worked there maybe 8 months before I was able to transition to a much better hospital where the nurse to patient ratio was 1:4. So quite an improvement.
Wow. That's drastic.
Yeah. And so once I started working at the second hospital I worked at, I stayed there for 5 years, worked on like 6 different psychiatric subspecialty units, like geriatric psych, perinatal psych, adult crisis, did a little bit of ECT even, and then eating disorder unit and child and adolescent. So I got just a really, really awesome experiences there, and also actually started to meet coworkers who were just as passionate about psychiatry and taking good care of people as I was. So that was really nice. I really did enjoy being a psychiatric nurse. And it did get a little, I think what got hard about being a psychiatric nurse was some of the systemic issues and institutional barriers and things, and having to take care of patients in a way that, it wasn't anywhere near as bad as the first job I was at, but it just seemed like unnecessarily restrictive at times, and really just wanted to be able to do more and try to keep people out of the hospital. So I'm really happy that I did become a Psych NP, but there definitely are times I miss the camaraderie of the psychiatric nursing unit.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Do you feel like working as a psych nurse for 5 years really changed kind of that first role as a Psych NP for you?
Yeah, I feel like my psychiatric nursing experience did help me a lot, especially in my first role, because the patients I was seeing were lower acuity than what I was used to. And so I felt like I could manage those medication regimens.
That's a great point. I think I felt kind of thrown into the fire because I didn't have that extensive psychiatric nursing background, and I think that would have helped my confidence in that first role for sure.
Yeah. And that's what makes it just so much more important to have that mentorship and structure, and which you had at your first job. So they did a great job setting that up for you. Okay. Lindsay, tell us about your jobs that you had before becoming a Psych NP. You had some pretty cool ones.
I did. I always had multiple jobs to afford my Sephora habit. And Subway was one of those as a sandwich artist. And yes, I would smell of herbs and cheese after every shift.
Lovely.
And I worked for the university that I went to doing kind of random things like catering, working in the like banquet hall type, service type things. Hold on. What did I do? Oh, I was a receptionist for the disability services at the university I went to. I worked at a tanning salon. I lifeguarded, and I did data entry. I'm a very fast typer, proud of it.
That probably has helped you a lot in your nursing career as well.
It has. I remember some of my students being like, how do you type like that and like finish your notes? Like, and I was proud of that. And then I was a retail at the Buckle too. So like the Be-Gemmed jeans, I rocked those. I did in-home caregiving. I was a CNA at an assisted living place. I nannied. And then I became a community health nurse at a university health center. So.
Wow, that you've had a lot of jobs. That's amazing. You're such a hard worker.
I've always liked to work.
Do you still have the Buckle jeans?
No. I kind of wished I had a pair or two, I'm like a girly girl, like I like, kind of the sparkle, so yeah, I love those. Did you ever wear those?
I did. And it wasn't because I wanted to though. My mom always worked in retail, so she constantly was bringing clothes home that I didn't want. But some of the clothes she brought home I did like, but I specifically remember when the jeans with the bedazzled back pockets got really big at Dillard's, which was a place that she worked for a while.
Yeah.
I had several pairs, and the thing is they were really comfortable. Like the denim was really soft. So I did have a few pairs. Yeah.
Surprises me. But interesting.
I'm a wild card,
Yeah. Tell me like a little bit about why you think you were drawn to be a psychic.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what happened in my life that drew me to this field? I do feel like we all have things that happen that make us good at what we do, right? So I was a very sensitive kid. I was painfully empathetic. I wanted to save all the animals and all the children in the world. And even as like a really young kid, I remember having a therapist at one point when I was 10. And I remember talking to her and crying about how worried I was about all the dogs in the shelter and how I couldn't sleep at night because I was just thinking of all the dogs and how they were in the shelter. So I was, very sensitive, very empathetic. I told my mom I wanted to be a priest when I grew up because I think I saw a movie where like a priest was saving some animals and I don't know, helping some children. And I was like, oh, I want to do that. So yeah, I was a sensitive kid. And I also grew up in two very different environments because my parents got divorced when I was really young. So one environment was really, really chaotic and one environment was really stable. And so kind of going back and forth between those two worlds, I felt like I got exposed to a lot of different perspectives and different ways of life. I have an older brother, 2 years older than me, and we were very close as kids. I really looked up to him. I thought he was the coolest thing ever. I still think he's very cool. But we were really close. And when he started to have some behavioral issues, I was in maybe like second or third grade. And I was very much the mediator at home, especially in like the chaotic environment. I was sort of the referee. And I got so good at it that in sixth grade, my teachers nominated me to be a peer mediator at school for kids who got into fights.
Oh,
so
I love that.
Yeah, it makes me laugh thinking about it now. Like I had a little clipboard and they would like call me in and I would go, there would be two kids. I have vivid memories of this. And it's like, this is what I do now for work. But I would go in and there'd be two kids sitting across the table, like glaring at each other. And I would have my clipboard and I would ask my little questions and I would write down the answers and basically make them apologize to each other and then sign a contract that they weren't going to fight anymore.
That is too funny.
So yeah, I was a peer mediator.
Right. You were practicing those skills.
So yeah, as time went on, my brother continued to have some behavioral issues. That was really hard for me as a sensitive child who was very close to him. And then he ended up, when I was in seventh grade, he ended up getting sent to like a troubled teen school that was in like really far away in another state. So I felt like I just suddenly became an only child. That was really hard for me too. And I was always trying to understand just like what was going on, like why was he doing what he was doing. So I think that definitely played into my curiosity about human behavior. I think I was naturally curious about it anyway, but that played a big role. So once I was about halfway through high school, he did come back home, but then shortly after he came home, he ran away and started hopping trains. So yeah, he's very punk rock, very anarchist. He wanted to go be free, and I respected that, but it was, again, very stressful. I had a lot of anxiety, though I did not know at the time. Yeah. Like, back when I was a teenager, I never thought about mental health. I never thought about anxiety. I didn't really know how to put words to what I was feeling. And because I lived in two different homes, one that was middle class and one that was a low income home, I really wanted to make sure that I got a stable career so that I could support myself and help out my family who was on the low income side. And so I originally wanted to be a veterinarian, of course, but there was a few barriers to that. I am allergic to cats and dogs. So I had to kind of come to terms with that. And, I'm sure I could have gotten allergy shots, but whatever. So I took an allied health class in high school and learned that nursing was a thing and that travel nursing was a thing. And that really appealed to me. So I became a CNA in high school and realized I really liked helping people, and I realized it could be a really stable career for me. So I just decided that's what I was going to do. So it was definitely a combination of wanting to help people, being curious about human nature, and wanting a stable career. Yeah. And then I think that's basically it. Awesome. What about you? What do you think informed your decision to become a Psych NP in your life?
I think I was always kind of that go-to friend for people who, they'd go to if they were having problems or wanted to process something, kind of the non-judgmental, accepting friend who would lend a listening ear, I think was kind of characteristic. I also had pretty big emotions, but I kind of kept them inside quite a bit as a kid. And I really wanted to fit in and just kind of be a chameleon and that kind of thing. My dad, so I was raised in a 2-parent home, and neither of my parents had gone to college. And my dad mainly worked in sales, raising us. And so there were times when financially it was more stable, and then times where it was harder. If anybody's grown up with that kind of commission structure, you might know. But for my parents, it was really very important that they tried to make sacrifices to give us opportunities that they didn't have. And so they definitely did do that. And by, working different positions at the university that I went to for my undergrad and things like that. So I never took that lightly, those opportunities. And then when I got started at the health center as a community health nurse, I had a mentor, a boss he handed me a 5-year planning book. And I was I was having so much imposter syndrome. I remember asking the dean of the nursing program, because she was new, if it was normal. She's like, yeah, I feel like that. And I'm like, really? She was the head of Mayo's mindfulness before she had come. So I was like, okay, that makes me feel better. Anyway, she really had me thinking about 5 years from now and what I wanted to do. And I was exposed to the Psych NP role there at the health center. So I was like, this seems like a really cool role. I had never seen what Psych NPs do. I didn't really like my undergrad rotation because it didn't seem like people were really getting better. So I got very intrigued and, tried to kind of soak up all that I could learn from them. And I kind of I had the opportunity to receive a tuition break because I was working at the university also. So I really felt like I needed to embrace that opportunity again, to do that. So I also wanted, something stable. And my dad always encouraged us to do something that, you could make money doing and that would be stable. So I actually, I have 2 sisters who are both nurses and a brother who's a firefighter. So we all ended up in the healthcare field.
Saving lives. And that's so funny because when I told my mom that I wanted to be a nurse, she was disappointed. And she was like, I thought you were going to be a jazz singer, Rachel. So yeah. Yeah. It was my idea, and my family was like, that's random. That's kind of like the theme, is that I have ideas. My family thinks they're random, but they end up supporting me. So
I love that. I love that. That's cool.
It's interesting though, when we start nursing school, I think most people in our generation, and Taylor Swift's generation, we don't really know about psychiatric nursing until we get there.
Yeah.
And then, cause that was I had no idea that was a thing.
Right.
And then day one of my psychiatric nursing class, I was like, oh my God, this is it. Yeah. This is it for me. I love this. And everyone was like, what's wrong with you? And I was like, what? I finally found my thing.
I found my calling.
So
yeah. And then I also had a couple personal experiences with friends who went through mental health struggles that just like hurt my heart so much to see them struggling. And so I always kind of had this intrinsic motivation of like, what can I do to try to help alleviate some of that? And so I think that was part of it too.
Yeah. I feel like you were I can just see little Lindsay in Ohio being like a good listener and just naturally validating and just having those therapeutic micro skills that, you just have them naturally. So
I have a lot of soft nursing skills because my dad he's kind of an engaging, charismatic person who connects with people easily and gets them to open up and tell their story. And then my mom's just like super accepting and non-judgmental. So I think just observing them as people, I kind of was like, learn those traits. So
yeah, totally. Yeah. My mom is super, my mom's, I would say, a very eccentric person, super creative, artistic.
Yeah.
And growing up as her daughter, I think has made me I kind of just think everybody's normal. I just am like, I don't judge people very quickly. So I think that's helped me a lot to connect with people and really just be curious about them. So
yeah, that's awesome. I also feel like you are like a very creative soul. Side note. I just get this vibe that like it's been kind of like underneath the surface. It was there when you were a kid and then it was like very structured. And then, but I definitely get that sense just from the short time I've known you.
That I'm so glad you say that because I definitely was always like a creative kid. That's what my teachers would always say. Like, that was always the comment, like, Rachel's so creative. She thinks outside the box. Like, I loved writing and making up stories. And I was a theater kid. And so, And then I sort of pushed all that down when I became a nurse because I thought I wasn't allowed. I thought to be stable, I couldn't embrace that part of me. And so it's been really fun to be able to embrace my creativity now and realize like, oh my God, I can do things. I can do creative things and be a nurse and be a nurse practitioner and be good at my job and also be myself. So that's been like an epiphany for me.
When was that, do you think?
I really think in the last couple of years, maybe. I think when I started my Instagram, I was like, oh, I can express myself and I can be, a good nurse practitioner too. I can do both. So,
well, Rachel was the one who first inspired me to go online as a Psych NP, totally out of my comfort zone, but I saw some Facebook forum thing about mentors and I was like, went and looked at hers and I was like, oh, this is really cool. She does this. I think I could do this. I think I could put myself out there. I don't know. It's scary.
Yeah. But you're like, she's doing it. She seems like she's fine. I guess I can do it too.
Yep. So that was kind of like exposure therapy for me.
And that's why we want to highlight Psych NPs on this podcast so people can see all the different things. And so we can also learn more things that we could be doing. Who knows? Who knows what projects we're going to end up doing after this.
You never know. Two people with ADHD, lots of creative ideas.
So many creative ideas. Yeah. Very excited to see how this evolves. So let's move into segment 3, which is our listener question segment. So Lindsay, read us the listener question.
Okay. So we had a student who says, I got a job offer, but I'm really nervous because I don't feel prepared enough to do psychotherapy. They want me to do brief psychotherapy and medication management. What should I do?
I have some thoughts. I think I'd want to know a little bit more information about this person's program and any training that they got in psychotherapy. I know that every Psych NP program is required to have training in 2 different psychotherapy modalities. So I'd be curious to know which modalities they had. I think a lot of programs do supportive or solution focused or brief therapy. So I think I would want to talk to this person about what they have been trained in, and then also give them some resources on how they can feel more confident in their skills, because psychotherapy, I think, sounds like a really intimidating term because we know therapists who, amazing psychotherapists who get their graduate degree and it's all about therapy and that's what they do.
Yeah.
And we don't want to say that we're doing the same thing that they're doing because we didn't, our training was different. So I think it's important to remember that psychotherapy is an umbrella term, and it can mean something as in-depth and specific as psychoanalysis or, being certified in DBT, but it can also be something as simple as supportive psychotherapy. I think with a little bit of encouragement and helping them identify that, they would probably feel more comfortable accepting a job like this. I think that having an employer who supports you doing therapy in your med management visits is actually a really good thing. So, yeah, I would say go for it.
No, I think you really hit the nail on the head, Rachel. And I think that the ambiguity around incorporating psychotherapy into medication management can create a lot of anxiety for new grads. I know that it did for me, as well as just the anxiety or the ambiguity of this field. I think it can be really anxiety provoking.
I think, like learning to embrace the growth edge. That's a term that I learned from this deliberate practice book I'm reading, is you want to practice right at your growth edge. So you're doing things that you're comfortable with, but you're also pushing yourself just a little bit to expand your skill set. So that might look like reading about CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. That might look like trying to find someone who will do case consults with you, which we can help you with, for learning different therapeutic skills. There are probably a lot of things that you already are doing that are therapeutic. So I think just having the words to describe what you're doing, I think helps a lot. But one other thing I will say though, is you do want to make sure that your employer is not pressuring you to use an add-on therapy code in appointments where you're not doing add-on therapy. So, we don't know. We'd have to kind of look and see what the terminology they're using is, but you certainly only want to bill for things that you are doing. So I think that with our next episode, we're going to be able to provide a lot more clarity. And Debbie Granick is so good at explaining this stuff. Definitely join us for episode 2. We are going to be sharing part 1 of our 3-part series with Dr. Debbie Granick. So she was a therapist for many years and then became a Psych NP. And now she teaches Psych NPs how to integrate therapy into med management visits. So
you will not want to miss Debbie Granick. She is what I wish I would have had as a new grad. I think I would have had a lot less anxiety if I could have sat down with Debbie and had her explain things in a way that makes sense. So we've been super inspired by how excited you guys have all been about this podcast and super encouraged. So thank you guys. Much appreciated.
You can find us on Instagram at Dr. Lindsay _Psych NP. And you can find me on Instagram at psych.nurse.school. And you can find the podcast on Instagram at 2 Psych NPs in a pod. Okay, so I guess this is it.
This is it. 2 Psych NPs in a podcast.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.